the Hayes Public Library. I'm Jessica, and we're here for our In Our Community series, which kind of just explores community members and organizations and kind of learning who they are to Hayes, and how they change us. Today we have Cathy's Bread. We have Cathy Drabkin. If you could give her a big round of applause.
So, true story. This was like the second or third week of my first summer of baking for the downtown market. And I decided I wanted to make galettes. You know what those are? They're those rustic, open-faced, fresh fruit tarts. They get featured on the covers of cooking magazines. They often are filled with seasonal fruit, blueberries, cherries, plums, and in my case, strawberries and rhubarb. Very juicy strawberries and rhubarb. And I wanted to bake them directly on my hearth stones in my oven because I wanted the pastry to come out very crisp and flaky, no soggy bottoms. So I get them all put together, preheat the oven, slide them in, and start working on other things that I'm going to be taking to the market. And about 20 minutes in, I hear this intense, and I mean intense, sizzling coming from the oven. That does not sound very good. That does not sound like baking pastry. I open the door and out comes a plume of smoke. Strawberry and rhubarb juices are pouring, I mean just pouring out of my pastry crust over the stones and onto the floor of my oven, where they have, oh my God, flames caught on fire. Cue to chicken with her head cut off. Oh no, disaster! What do I do? What do I do? But to tell the truth, I wasn't panicking about the juices that were puddling on the floor and turning into a molten charred mess, or the smoke that was billowing out of my oven and setting off the smoke detector, or the flames that were growing ever higher, for which, shame on me, I did not even own a fire extinguisher. I was standing there frantically trying to figure out why did I start these on the stones without first testing them out? How can I save my galettes? First years are always such learning experiences. Today I've been asked to tell you a little bit about my journey over the past 10 years to becoming the owner of Cathy's Breads, a home-based micro bakery. In some ways, my experience has been a little bit like this story, enthusiastically rushing headlong into disaster and learning afterwards. Of course, I exaggerate. Sometimes I rushed headlong into totally undeserved triumph. My journey has earlier roots. I grew up in a home that ate grocery store bread, soft, squishly, tasteless, crustless, only as good as the holder of other foods or as the sopper-upper of gravies and the like. It was never enjoyed for its own qualities. It wasn't until I met my husband that I developed an appreciation for real bread. Doug grew up in New York, where there's a bakery on every corner, and his family would make weekly trips for bagels, for caraway rye bread, for challah braids shared at Sabbath on Friday nights, a totally different experience than mine. When we married, I became determined to master homemade bread. So I experimented, researched, and learned along the way and discovered the huge difference between store-bought and homemade. I got pretty good at it, becoming the person who was asked to bring breads and even desserts to potluck dinners. But still, up to this point, it was definitely a weekend hobby. Then, about 12 years ago, I found myself between jobs, so I began teaching baking classes through Hayes Rep, which I found rewarding and which forced me to become much more exacting in my methods and my measurements so that I could teach others and consistently reproduce baked goods. The experience also allowed me to develop a large repertoire of different types of baked goods that I was comfortable making. I actually began selling my goods in the summer of 2013 with the start of the downtown Hayes Market. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I kid you not, I'm talking like the week before the first market, I decided to give it a go. Baked off 30 loaves, took them down, absolutely sure I'd be bringing most of them back with me. Instead, I sold out in 20 minutes and discovered that there was a demand for good bread in our community. That scenario repeated itself each week, and by the end of the summer, I had acquired a group of customers who were wanting to know how they were going to get their weekly breads after the market shut down in the fall. Thus was born my in-home micro bakery. My current business model is that I bake once a week on Fridays during the school year only, taking off summers and school breaks so that my husband and my schedules are in sync. My menu changes every week. There's only one bread that is repeated each time. And I usually offer 6 to 8 savory loaves and the same number of sweets, pastries, cakes, croissants, cookies each week. I have a website with an online ordering system, and I operate under farmers market regulations, and I can explain that to anybody who's interested later on. The number of items I bake from week to week varies hugely, depending on if there's a holiday or an event going on. A small week might be 90 items ordered, and by an item I mean like a loaf of bread, a box of croissants, a bag of cookies. An insanely crazy week might be more like 350 orders. It all happens in my home with me and a half-time baking assistant, along with 3 ovens, 3 mixers, 3 refrigerators, and 4 freezers, 2 of which can convert to refrigerators in my basement. I think it's safe to say that I now run a serious hobby bakery and maybe an appliance store on the side. It's small, it's not enough to live on, but it's significant both for its setting and its reach. So, another true story. This was that same first year when I was trying to figure out how to bake 50 or 60 loaves in a day. And I use a method where I mix my doughs on one day and let them bulk ferment in the refrigerator overnight, and then shape, rise, and bake them off the next day. And I was doing this with just 1 extra fridge in the basement. So to physically fit everything in, I would put my doughs in extra large Ziploc bags because I could stack them up and they seemed to take up less space than Tupperware containers. But yeasted dough, even in cold environments, is still active. And the bigger bulk of dough that you're dealing with, the longer it takes to cool down and to stop rising. Anyways, my husband woke me up in the middle of the night saying, "You've got to see this." Some of my rising doughs had exploded out of their bags and pushed open the refrigerator door. Well, when the fridge door is open, the light comes on. And when the light is on for a while, the bulb gets hot. And the bulb had melted a hole in one of the bags. And the heat of the bulb had started to bake some of the dough into bread in my fridge. I ended up throwing away a lot of dough that day and bought a second fridge that week and changed my methods. Over the years, I've tried to develop principles to guide my work. And here are 4, there's of course many others. But first of all, I try to bake everything on the day that it's picked up for the freshest product possible. Not everything, but almost all of my baked goods that I bake have no preservatives. So about 90 to 95% of what I do bake is baked on Fridays. The exception might be cookies or pound cakes and that kind of thing, which are baked on Wednesdays and Thursdays. It's not so much that what I bake won't hold another 2 or 3 days, or that it couldn't be frozen for a longer shelf period, but that I'd rather give that extra period of product shelf life to my customer. Where possible and feasible, I use locally sourced ingredients. Almost all of my flours and grains are organic and come from Heartland Mill in Marienthal, Kansas. So about 4 times a year, I make the 2-hour trip down to Marienthal in my Toyota Camry. I load it up with 800 pounds of flour and drive back very slowly. I've also been known to use peaches and plums from the farmer's market, fresh herbs and rhubarb from my neighbors' gardens, and sour cherries and apples from my backyard trees. I do a lot of experimenting. I'm constantly trying to develop new products, and I probably have nearly 300 different items in my repertoire. This is rather untypical of bakeries, which usually keep a static menu and maybe add a seasonal fruit product now and then. But for me, there is a whole world of breads and pastries for inspiration that I want to share with others. And I see no reason to limit my menu to a few safe standards. How boring. Case in point, today's refreshments include a buckwheat loaf from Ukraine, a buttermilk rye loaf from Finland, a honey cake from Russia, and Spitzbuben cookies from Germany. We'll travel the world together. I like to call myself a neighborhood bakery, and by that I hope to emphasize the connection between the baker and the eater beyond a commercial transaction. One of my favorite customers, I was hoping she might show up, but anyway, one of my favorite customers is Lucille, who lives in La Crosse. She's 92 years old and has a friend who drives her to Hayes every week so that she can pick up her order. Lucille's been keeping a list of all the different items she's ordered and recently surpassed 100 different products, 100 different products. Lucille keeps me on my toes. I have to make sure there are new items so that she can add to her list. And she frequently comes with a list of questions to ask me. Why do you score your breads before going into the oven? Or why are your ryes all sourdoughs? Or how does stretching and folding the dough develop gluten differently than traditional kneading? I'm pretty sure Lucille looks forward to her weekly trip as much to Hayes as much as I do. Such interactions remind me that beyond selling breads and sweets, my baking brings community and connection and friendship to my life and the lives of others. Another story. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, and I had a big special order on the Sunday after Thanksgiving for an out-of-town baby christening. I wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning to bake off croissants and quiches and galettes and discover a huge snowstorm is going on and that I have no power. I charge down the basement steps, hoping that this is just a breaker issue, but alas, the whole house, in fact the entire street, is dead. Oh no, what to do? This order is feeding a group of people for a special event at a specific time. They're going to be here in 5 hours to pick up their stuff. What if the power doesn't come back on? Chicken with her head cut off. In my panic, I do notice that across the street, at the house that my mother-in-law owns and where my son is currently living, the back porch light is on. Sam left that light on again. Light, electricity, power. Oh, hooray! I've baked in that oven before. In fact, my baking stones are still in it. So I put on my snow boots and wait across the dark street to preheat the oven in that kitchen. Then head back over to my house, set up a dozen candles, and assemble as much as I can by candlelight before making about a dozen trips through heavy snowfall and blowing winds to haul everything over, one baking sheet at a time, to the working oven. At some point, I make enough noise to waken my son Sam, who comes out in his underwear, alarmed at the unannounced visit. Mom, what are you doing? After I explain, Mom, don't you think they'll probably cancel the event because of the snow? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Too late now. In fact, they did delay the event, and the power did eventually come back on, but by gosh, I was ready. Local baker triumphs over snowstorm. For those of you who may be interested in starting a home bakery, here are some things that I've learned and am still learning. It's a very short list, 5 points. And I'm happy to talk to anybody with questions along the way in this process. But for that short list, 1, it's important to love what you are doing, to really enjoy not only the final product, but the process, the workmanship, and the artistry involved. Because some days, as you are peeling, coring, and slicing 50 pounds of apples for pies, or zesting 20 pounds of lemons, or shaping 30 pans of cinnamon swirl bread, you are not going to be having fun. Your feet and your back will hurt, your hands will be tired, so it helps to have a mission. 2, test and retest. Experiment on friends and ask for feedback. You are feeding other people whose tastes may differ from yours. And yet at the same time, and this may seem contrary, but at the same time, make sure that you have your own taste and production standards. So for instance, for years, I didn't offer croissants because I didn't feel I could produce them as well as they deserved to be. Some bakeries only offer naturally leavened sourdough products. Others only 100% whole grain products. They've set their own standards. In general, I try to only bake items that I like to eat myself. Unfortunately, I have a wide palate. But it does rule out certain things. Like, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but like those nasty frosted sugar cookies that everyone else loves, or those elegant French macarons, which I find cloyingly sweet. I do concede to my customers' demand for cinnamon rolls, even though I think of them as the floozies of the pastry world. Cheap, sugary thrills, you know? 3, know when to say no. Overcommitting, whether it's the number of orders you take, or the size of your menu, or the special events you agree to do, does no one any good. This is one area that I struggle with regularly, and I find that when I do overcommit, my attention to my product suffers, and my customers may not be as happy. Not to mention that overworking is hard on a baker's body. 4, customer service is important. Even if your product is perfect, there's a way to improve the experience, whether it's offering a samples table, or being flexible on pickup times, or allowing occasional special orders, or setting up a frequent buyer's reward program, or even trying out someone's grandma's recipe so that they can see what it might taste like. Not to finding ways to deepen that connection with the people who are supporting you and your work is important. And then finally, take what you do seriously. Even if you are a small-time hobby baker in a small town, your seriousness sets the standard for how others view and appreciate your work. And the work that you are doing, regardless of how much money you do or don't make, is valuable. Thank you for letting me share my passion with you today, and for the opportunity to step back and look at my progress over the past 10 years. I'm happy to answer anybody's questions now or during refreshments, and we'll begin after a while. Thank you. Yes, Cheryl.
After your exploding refrigerator, you said you changed your method. So what do you do now?
That's different. Well, I reduce the amount of yeast that I use. I reduce the time that I let it ferment at room temperature before I put it in the fridge. And then I have bigger buckets and more refrigerators.
Yeah, it actually was generating its own heat. Even when you touched it, it was like, warm.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. And even dividing your dough into smaller buckets instead of really big bus buckets will help prevent that. Yes?
What yeast do you use?
I use 2 kinds of yeast. I use SAF brand, which is, I'm not sure it's locally available, but it's certainly available on Amazon. And both of them are called an instant yeast, which means you can mix it with the flour without proofing it in water first. I use their regular brand, which is the red label, and then I use their gold yeast, which is an osmotolerant yeast, which means that it can be put into doughs with high sugar levels and be more productive than your regular yeast. Sugar affects yeast. It draws water away from it, and so then if you've ever made a high sugar dough, you'll notice that it rises much slower, and so that helps prevent that, keeps things moving along.
Well, don't you also use yeast from the air and stuff?
Oh, well, yeah, and I do sourdoughs too. So that's a wild yeast in a way, a combination of wild yeast and bacteria. Yeah.
Spell the second yeast.
Oh, osmotolerant. O-S-M-O tolerant. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you, it's like, how in the world do you do it? I mean, can you kind of explain what your day or two?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah,
A
okay.
day in life.
A day in the week.
Bread do me in. I don't know how you do it.
They do the week cycle.
All right. So the menu goes out on Saturday morning. Orders start to come in. Usually Saturday, Sunday, I'm doing administrative things like printing out labels, putting them on boxes and bags, that kind of thing. And I will also start my croissant dough, which can be made completely and put in the freezer before you roll it. And I start my pie crust, which can also be shaped into like disc, and then throw that in the freezer. Monday and Tuesday is more the same. Tuesday, orders usually are cut off at around 10 a.m., so I know what I'm in for. And then I will do things like figure out my grocery list, figure out my oven schedule, how much of each I need to make, and then I will mix cookie doughs on Tuesday and granola. Wednesday is sort of like a ingredient prep day, so I'll make glazes, I'll toast nuts, I'll make fillings, anything that can be done in advance without any harm. I'll cut apart apricots for my orchard bread. I'll pre-weigh various things, just so that the next day, which is my mixing day, can go very smoothly and I don't have to stop. I also on Wednesday bake off my cookies and my granola and fruit nut bars. Then Thursday is mixing day, so if I'm doing sourdoughs, I will have been also feeding my starter on Tuesday and Wednesday, but then I'll start mixing my sourdoughs and my regular doughs and get them to the point where I can put them in the fridge overnight. And then also bake off cakes. And then, and sometimes I'll pre-shape doughs. So like if I've got a bunch of challah doughs that involve like 6 strands of dough that I'm going to braid together, I will go ahead and pre-weigh out and roll up sort of a pre-shaped roll of each strand and throw it in the fridge, so that then the Friday, which is my production day, all I have to do is roll out that piece of dough. I don't have to cut and weigh it and make sure I have enough dough for all the strands. And then Friday, depending on how many orders I do, I try never to get up before 4 a.m. And then I start, doughs are pulled out, they're divided, they're shaped, they're risen, they're in and out of the ovens. I have 3 ovens. So, and my biggest oven can do 18 loaves at a time. My next one can do 12, and then I have a regular convection home oven. So that's sort of how it works. And I do have critical. I have an assistant who's been working with me for the last 2 years, who does about 20 hours on Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays.
Can you describe the oven schedule? When you walk there on the basement door, these 3 columns apron.
It's not very interesting. I'll get to that after this question.
You mentioned you print out labels sometimes. So do you ship your products at all, and how does that work?
No, I've been asked to do that, but I just feel like the shipping cost is so high compared to you'd be paying $20 or something in order to get it there in time so that it was still fresh.
So it's just mainly local and people use
Right. Yeah, no, the labels are required by farmers market regulations. You have to have on any product that you sell the name and the quantity and all the ingredients and the allergens and your address and all that stuff.
That makes a lot more sense.
I would imagine that having 3 ovens and 3 refrigerators, etc., puts out a lot of heat. How do you tolerate the heat in the kitchen as a fragile human being?
Well, first of all, I don't bake in the summer. We open windows. I do have a mini split, which is like a air conditioner unit just for the kitchen. So I can actually close off the kitchen and sort of do that, and we dress scantily.
Mercy.
Cathy, that week you described, how many hours are you dedicating to all your prepping and baking? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. It depends on the weekend and how busy the week is. I mean, I would say on a Wednesday and Thursday, I probably am getting up, and I'm probably in the kitchen. Well, my assistant comes at 7:45, so I'm certainly in the kitchen by then. Sometimes a half hour earlier, and then she leaves at 3, and I may take a break, and then everything's not something that can be done step after step. Sometimes you have to wait, those have to rise, or whatever. So sometimes I'll be back in the kitchen for a couple hours in the evening. So, yeah.
Can you talk about your tricks you take to try different?
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I think is really important is to constantly educate myself. I feel like I'm and you guys are laugh, but I feel like I'm really just a intermediate, maybe advanced intermediate, but intermediate baker. I mean, there's so much to learn, and there's so many skills to take advantage of. And so there are baking workshops that take place around the country. One is offered, or a number of them are offered at King Arthur Flour in Vermont. They have both home baker level and professional level classes. And then there's out in San Francisco, the San Francisco Baking Institute, which does all professional levels, and they'll do weekend workshops, which is not worth the flight out, but they'll do week-long, or even, you know, week-long back-to-back. And so I've done things like sourdough breads, I've done cake production, I did viennoiserie, which is the production of croissants and laminated doughs. That was a 2-week class, that was amazing. And so then the challenge is to come back and practice all that so that it can be shared with everyone else.
What's a laminated dough?
Oh, okay. So it's a croissant, or a croissant type thing. So you create a base dough, and then you take a lot of butter, you pound it into a block, and you put it on your dough, and you fold your dough around it. Then you roll it out, fold it, roll it out, fold it, depending on 2 to 3 times, depending on what you're producing. And what it does is you get these very thin sheets of butter in between your layers of dough, and when it bakes, it poofs it up, and it makes these lovely, flaky croissants.
Speaking of laminated doughs, I'm curious, do you use a dough sheeter?
Oh, I wish I had a dough sheeter.
I wish I had a dough sheeter, my arms get so tired.
I know, no, I don't. And I've looked at it sort of quasi-seriously. The problem is space. Even the ones that are tabletop and that have the wings that come up, I feel like they would need to be on a cart, so that, because I can't give up table space that it would take. So I haven't quite given up, but yeah, this is, yeah.
How much can you bench press?
I don't know, it's the downward pressing that really gets you, and I mean, after, 10 books of croissants, your wrists are really feeling it. So yeah, it's a concern. Yes.
Just thanks. How do you go about choosing, especially thinking about when you're incorporating fresh foods into, how do you choose it a week before? Because as many people around Hayes know, you can't always bet on what you're gonna get.
Yeah, I've been burned a couple of times. It sort of depends on what it is. I try to go for things that are usually almost always in season, Even if they're not in season in Hayes, blueberries, you can always find blueberries at Walmart or Dillon's. Trickier things are things that are sort of specialty products that may float in and out of grocery stores, like phyllo dough. If I'm making baklava, I may buy what I think I'll need a couple of weeks in advance, just so I don't end up without any. There are things that I can't buy in Hayes, like whole hazelnuts, or what was something else?
Fresh rhubarb.
Yeah, that's hard. I've got a couple of local sources. Sometimes you see it, but it's very hit or miss. So I use Amazon. There's a restaurant supply store in Kansas City called Restaurant Depot. I go there fairly regularly. And I've become friends with various chefs in town, so I can tap into their supplies chains as well. Yeah. Good question.
Why don't you wait?
Oh. I try. I work hard, yeah. And actually, I sort of end up limiting what I eat to what I'm experimenting with, because, sometimes it takes more than one bite to know whether something's going to be good to offer, And so I feel like I have to sort of be careful that way.
Do you get tired of the sweets and the...
I do, yeah, sure, yeah.
Number for meat.
I get tired of being in the kitchen sometimes, It's like, how many times can we go out to dinner this week?
And you go out to dinner every Friday night.
I do, yeah. It's like, I don't want to see anything. I don't care what we're doing afterwards. I'm going out to dinner. Somebody else is cooking. All right. Well,
Favorite, Cathy?
oh, that's like asking. The question was, do I have a favorite?
Sophie's choice.
That's like asking me to choose between my children. What I enjoy eating and actually making most are things that are interesting, things that have complex textures or that are more than just sugar, you know, things that have chocolate or nuts or caramel or fresh fruit. I mean, just, I like the contrast of something soft and squishy. And things that also have a story behind them. I just sort of find that the funnest things to make and eat. Yes.
How do you feel about vegetables in baking? Like
Oh.
zucchini, carrots?
Oh, I do that sometimes. You know, I feel like a lot of people do that in their home baking, and so I try to steer what I offer towards things that aren't going to be a typical home bakery, just because, you know, a lot of people are great home bakers, and they'll just say, well, I have to make banana bread, you know? So I like to take it to, and really I do a lot of visiting of other bakeries in other towns whenever we travel. It's sort of a bakery crawl as well. And so because I can get inspiration from other folks and from other places, and then I can bring that back, and so I'm not above stealing ideas.
Yeah, in fact, the whole, like, that Instagram.
Oh yeah, my Instagram account is all bakeries. It's blueberry cheesecake croissants. That sounds pretty good. You know, maybe I'll try that. All right, well, let me tell you about the refreshments. And then we can dig in, and you're welcome to ask me any other questions that may arise. So I brought two breads. They're both experiments. You guys are my guinea pigs for a event that I'm doing in 2 weeks, a tasting party. So, and some are finished products, some aren't. So, this is a Helsinki rye bread. It's a very bold flavored loaf. It has amber beer and fennel and anise and orange zest. It's a sourdough, and it's made with about 40% rye flour, so it'll be a very strong loaf. This over here is the Ukrainian buckwheat sourdough. So a lighter sourdough flavor. Buckwheat is sort of it's a gluten-free loaf flour. There's about 20% of it, along with just regular wheat flour. And it'll have a milder sourdough and sort of a chewy, warm texture. This here is the Russian honey cake. And this is sort of an interesting process. The cake layers are actually more like a cookie than a cake, and you actually roll out the layers and bake them until they're very crisp, and then you stack them up and fill them in between with sour cream confectioner's sugar filling, and you let it sit for at least 12 hours, maybe even 24, and the sour cream gets absorbed into the cake layers and becomes a soft cake. And it's topped with a burnt honey caramel sauce. And then over here's some, I call them jumbleberry crumb bars. I was just trying to clear out frozen berries out of my freezer. So they have blueberries and blackberries and raspberries. And then finally I have my sort of first attempt, really. It's Buben. Local German, Volga German specialties is another thing that I avoid because I figure everybody's grandma makes them, and I am not Volga German, and I'm sure to step on somebody's toes. But a friend of mine shared her cookies with me, and I tried them, and they were delicious. These are not there yet, but they're not bad. They're not bad, and they are filled with my homemade Meyer lemon marmalade. So I think I'm just going to invite you to come up and help yourselves.